Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The lotion smelled faintly of vanilla, smooth and warm against my skin as I rubbed it over my chest. The soft fabric of my bra lay discarded beside me, and for a moment, the quiet of the room seemed almost tangible. I could feel the lingering tension in the air before I even noticed him. He appeared at the doorway without a sound, and my heart jumped in a way that surprised me. Our eyes met instantly, sharp, unflinching, loaded with an unspoken electricity. I didn't look away. My hands, still gliding over my skin, froze only for a fraction of a second before continuing, as if to challenge the gravity pulling us toward each other. A slow, teasing smile tugged at his lips, and I caught the way his gaze lingered, unwavering. It was a look that could make any rational thought vanish. The space between us felt smaller, tighter, almost magnetic. Every subtle movement, the shift of his weight, the rise and fall of his chest, was amplified in my senses. My own pulse drummed louder than the faint hum of the ceiling fan above. He took a step closer, and the room seemed to shrink around us. The smell of his cologne, fresh, warm, slightly spicy, mixed with the sweet vanilla of my lotion, and for a moment, my breath caught. The air was thick with a charged silence that neither of us broke, but spoke volumes nonetheless. I felt the tension coil in my stomach, a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. There was something in his eyes, something daring, teasing, and profoundly intimate, that made it impossible to retreat. And yet, despite the boldness of the moment, nothing was forced, nothing crossed over the line. It was a delicate, thrilling dance of attraction that made me acutely aware of every heartbeat, every inch of closeness. Then, just as he reached for the doorknob again, pausing as if weighing whether to leave or stay, the scene froze in that perfect, charged moment. My chest heaved slightly, my gaze locked on his, and the question lingered in the air: what would happen next? The room was quiet again, though the charged silence from before still lingered like a heartbeat you couldn't quite catch. I leaned against the dresser, letting the lotion absorb into my skin, and tried to make sense of the storm I felt inside. He stood at the doorway, hesitant, almost shy, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the longing in his eyes. We hadn't always been this close. For months, we had skirted around our feelings, hiding behind casual smiles, playful teasing, and borrowed excuses. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up thinking about him, feeling an ache that no conversation could soothe. And he, so guarded, so careful with words, had given nothing away but glimpses, a lingering glance, a hand that brushed mine too long, laughter that hit too hard, leaving me dizzy. There had been arguments, too, small cracks in the way we understood each other. Moments where I had pushed too hard, or he had withdrawn, leaving a space that felt cold and infinite. Yet, even in those moments, there was an undercurrent neither of us could deny. Something unspoken, simmering beneath every word, every glance. Tonight, it was impossible to ignore. The closeness, the unsaid words, the subtle touches that seemed accidental but were anything but, they all wove together into a tension I could taste. I could see it mirrored in him, in the way his shoulders tensed, the faint swallow of nerves, the way he kept his gaze locked on me as if daring me to look away first. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said softly, voice low enough that it trembled slightly at the edges. There was something fragile there, a vulnerability he rarely allowed me to see. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "You didn't." I'm glad you stayed." My own voice sounded strange to me, lighter, more honest than I expected. And the way he smiled back, slow and uncertain, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. For a moment, the past, the cracks, the unspoken desires, they all seemed to melt into that shared breath, that quiet understanding that neither words nor actions could fully contain. There was suspense here, yes, but also a promise, one neither of us wanted to name out loud yet. And as we stood there, the distance between us mere inches, the question hung in the air, unasked: how much longer could we resist the pull we both felt? The quiet hum of the room seemed to amplify every subtle movement between us. I caught him glancing at the curve of my shoulder, the soft way my hands smoothed over my skin, and felt a flush creep up my neck. He wasn't trying to be obvious, but the intensity of his gaze betrayed a curiosity and a desire that made my chest tighten. I tried to focus on anything else, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the faint scent of vanilla from my lotion, but his presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. Every small gesture, every slight shift closer, set off alarms in my chest, a mix of thrill, nervousness, and something dangerously tempting. "You're hard to read," I murmured, letting a playful edge slip into my voice. My heartbeat surged when I noticed his jaw tighten just slightly, the brief flicker of jealousy, or maybe restraint, in his eyes. "I could say the same about you," he replied, his tone low and smooth, layered with a tension that made the air between us almost tangible. There was a hint of frustration in his posture, a silent push and pull that made it impossible to tell whether he wanted to stay or flee. A sudden, charged silence stretched out. I could feel the tension like static in the air, a magnetic force drawing us toward a moment neither of us were willing to name. Every glance, every hesitant step, every subtle brush of proximity whispered of something forbidden, something both thrilling and terrifying. I let my gaze linger on him, letting the teasing play between us, and felt my pulse quicken as I imagined the consequences of this closeness. His eyes held a storm of longing, a mix of curiosity and self-restraint, and I realized just how fragile this balance had become. One misstep, one word, one movement could tip us over the edge. And yet, even with the tension and the unspoken danger, there was a magnetic pull neither of us could deny. We were caught in the space between desire and restraint, flirting with a boundary that we both instinctively knew we weren't supposed to cross, yet couldn't resist approaching. The evening had wrapped the room in shadows, soft amber light spilling from a single lamp, highlighting the curves of familiar furniture and the subtle movements between us. We were alone, truly alone, for the first time without interruptions or excuses. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation, and every small sound, his breathing, my heartbeat, the faint scrape of a chair, seemed louder than it should. I found myself stepping closer, almost without thinking, drawn by the magnetic pull that had been building for weeks. He didn't move away, instead, he mirrored my shift, decreasing the space between us by inches, a silent agreement neither of us voiced. The warmth of his presence pressed gently against me, and I could feel the tension in his muscles matching my own. "You shouldn't be standing so close," I whispered, though my voice betrayed more curiosity than warning. My pulse surged, and I caught the subtle tremor in his jaw, the way his gaze flickered over mine with unspoken intent. "I can't help it," he said, quiet but firm, eyes never leaving mine. His words were both a confession and a challenge, drawing me into the delicate dance of desire and restraint that had been simmering between us for too long. The closeness was intoxicating, every subtle movement amplified. I felt the brush of his hand near mine, the faint heat radiating from his body, and the magnetic tension that made it impossible to think rationally. Our shared silence was louder than words, speaking volumes in the space between us. Every instinct in me screamed to close the distance, to see what would happen if the line we'd been tiptoeing along finally blurred. And yet, there was still a fraction of hesitation, an edge of danger that made this moment even more electrifying. Then, as if the universe had paused to watch, he tilted his head slightly, a slow, daring smile tugging at his lips. My chest tightened, breath caught, and my mind raced. Was this the moment we'd been inching toward? The answer hung in the air, suspended in tension, leaving the room and the audience on the precipice of something unavoidable. The room felt impossibly small, as though the walls had contracted to hold only the two of us and the tension crackling between us. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every breath shared, as though the air itself were conspiring to make this moment unforgettable. I could feel him there, so close, and for a split second, the world outside didn't exist. Then came the truth, landing with the weight of a storm. His voice was low, tight with emotion. I can't keep pretending anymore. I've wanted this, for both of us, for so long. And I thought I could control it, but I can't. My chest tightened, not from shock alone, but from the depth of what he was admitting. Every glance, every lingering touch, every teasing smile, all the unspoken signs I had been piecing together for months, suddenly made sense. The air between us vibrated with revelation, the magnetic pull now sharpened with clarity. Before I could respond, another sound split the room, a soft chime from the hallway, signaling someone's return. Panic flickered across his face. No. I didn't expect anyone to be home yet, he murmured. My own stomach twisted. The reality of the risk hit me, the possibility of being discovered, of crossing a line neither of us had ever dared to fully approach. But it was too late to retreat. The closeness, the months of unsaid words and stolen moments, had pulled us to the edge. And then the twist, a small note slipped from the drawer I hadn't noticed, addressed to me in a familiar hand. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. His name was on it, but the words inside hinted at someone else entirely, someone he had been confiding in, someone who had warned him, someone who knew our secret tension even before we did. I looked at him, heart racing with a mix of fear, attraction, and disbelief. His eyes widened, mirroring my own confusion. I can explain, he whispered, reaching out, but hesitating as if the risk of being seen was too high, too real. In that charged silence, everything shifted, attraction tangled with betrayal, desire meshed with uncertainty. And yet, despite the shock, the tension didn't vanish, it intensified, sharper and more electrifying than ever. I realized then that this was the moment we had been building toward, the point where risk, emotion, and longing collided, leaving both of us teetering on the edge of something dangerous and irresistible. And as the sound of footsteps drew closer from the hallway, the room held its breath, and so did I, knowing the next move would change everything. The tension that had held us hostage for so long finally broke, but not with relief, more with raw, electric energy that left my chest pounding. We were no longer skirting the edges of desire or tiptoeing around truths. Every emotion, every unspoken thought, was now out in the open. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear etched into every line of his face. I can't do this half-heartedly anymore, he said, voice shaking. If we're going to face this, everything, we have to be honest. No more hiding. My own hands trembled, a mix of nervousness and determination. The note still lay on the dresser, a tangible reminder of the risks we had taken and the secrets that had pushed us here. But instead of fear, I felt something else, clarity. This was the moment where hesitation had no place. I'm done pretending too, I admitted, my voice stronger than I expected. I can't deny it anymore. What we've been feeling, it's real. And whatever comes next, we face it together. He stepped closer, the space between us charged, the weight of the past months hanging heavy in the air. The worry, the risk, the uncertainty, all of it seemed to condense into a single, powerful moment. Our eyes locked, and in that gaze was a conversation that needed no words, apology, understanding, longing, and a tentative trust, all folded together. Then came the confrontation, not with anger but with vulnerability. He explained the note, the warning, the unexpected interference of someone else. And though it stung, the honesty was like a spark, igniting the tension we had been holding back and transforming it into something unbreakable. We argued, confessed, and apologized, every sentence carrying the weight of emotions we'd both tried to bury. By the time the conversation ended, the room felt different. The emotional storm had passed, leaving us raw but resolute. Our breaths were heavy, hearts racing, yet there was a sense of peace in knowing the truth was finally on the table. The closeness that had been dangerous now felt grounding, a bridge instead of a threat. I reached out, letting my hand hover near his, a tentative offering. He met it without hesitation, a smile breaking through the tension, a silent promise that whatever had happened, we were moving forward, together, fully aware of the consequences, yet unafraid. And as we stood there, the world outside momentarily forgotten, the room filled with a quiet understanding that the next step, whatever it might be, would be ours to take. The cliffhanger lingered, not of danger, but of anticipation. What would this new honesty, this raw closeness, ultimately lead to? The room was bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. The tension from earlier now melted into something warm, steady, and intimate. We stood facing each other, the space between us no longer charged with uncertainty but filled with understanding and quiet joy. He smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips that seemed to lift a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "I never thought we'd get here," he murmured, voice soft but full of emotion. "I know," I replied, letting my hand reach out, brushing lightly against his. The contact was gentle, almost hesitant, yet it carried a world of meaning. Every glance, every subtle movement, was a promise that we were finally allowing ourselves to feel fully, openly, and without fear. We laughed softly at a shared memory of our earlier awkward moments, the teasing tension now transformed into comfort and warmth. His eyes held a depth I had never truly noticed before, a mixture of admiration, care, and something more tender than desire, a true connection that went beyond the pull of attraction. "I've wanted to tell you for so long," he said, his hand brushing against mine with a nervous warmth, "that being near you, it feels like coming home." My chest tightened at the words. There was no ambiguity, no hesitation, only truth. "I feel the same," I whispered. "Every moment we've had, it's brought me here. To this exact moment." We leaned into each other slowly, the closeness no longer dangerous but comforting. Our foreheads met, breaths mingling in a quiet rhythm that matched the newfound peace between us. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced, it was a natural, heartfelt acknowledgement of everything we had endured, everything we had confessed, and everything we now shared. The room seemed to shrink to just the two of us, the outside world fading away. Time itself felt suspended, holding the perfect balance between anticipation and fulfillment. In that small, quiet space, we found the bond that had been simmering all along, one built on honesty, trust, and genuine affection. And as the evening light softened further, casting a gentle glow over our faces, I realized that this moment, simple, tender, and completely ours, was the culmination of everything that had led us here. Not just desire, not just tension, but connection. Real, lasting, and unforgettable. We smiled, a shared, unspoken understanding that this was the beginning of something beautiful, the start of a story that was finally allowed to bloom.